Did I cross a line for resenting an uninvited stranger living in my house? I'm a woman in my late 20s living by choice with my grandfather. Not because either of us needs help, but because we genuinely enjoy sharing a home. And until recently our life together felt warm, peaceful, and deeply familiar, full of small routines like him making tea while I vent about work or quietly braiding my hair while I ramble about my love life. That sense of safety cracked at a relative's very traditional wedding, where I was already drained and overstimulated when I was pushed into participating in a loud public family dance I didn't want to do, only to sit down afterward and have an older woman I had never met slowly look me up and down before making a sharp, humiliating comment about my body and how rarely I must dance. I swallowed my embarrassment to avoid causing a scene and assumed I'd never see her again. But to my shock, my grandfather invited the same woman, an acquaintance from the wedding, not even a close friend, back to our house without asking or telling me, turning what I assumed was a brief stop into a stay that stretched from one night into more than a week. Since then, she's lingered endlessly in our shared space, inserting herself into intimate conversations that aren't directed at her, criticizing my body when I mention cramps, scolding me for crying over work stress, and speaking to me like a misbehaving child rather than an adult in her own home. I haven't raised my voice, insulted her, or confronted her directly. I've only expressed privately to my grandfather and my siblings that I feel uncomfortable, disrespected, and blindsided by having a judgmental stranger living in my space. Yet somehow that has been twisted into me being labeled rude and ungrateful, leaving me wondering whether I'm actually wrong for wanting basic control over my own home and feeling hurt that my comfort seems to matter less than the feelings of someone I never invited. Did I finally go too far by enforcing a boundary at the airport? I grew up in a household where love came with conditions and anger came without warning. By the time I was barely a teenager, things had escalated so badly that social services intervened and I was legally placed with my other parent. During that process, my mother made it painfully clear how she felt about me. On official paperwork, she wrote that she no longer had a child. That single sentence followed me for decades and permanently shattered what little sense of family I had left. For most of my adult life, I coped by self-destructing. I drank heavily through my 20s and 30s, drifting from job to job, relationship to relationship, until I finally got sober several years ago. Sobriety forced me to confront old wounds, and against my better judgment, I reached out to my mother again. She was nearing 70 by then and had already lost contact with most of her children. I hoped time had softened her. It hadn't. When I cautiously asked if she had ever reflected on the past, she dismissed it entirely and told me to stop living in the past. I realized then that any relationship we had would require me to stay quiet about my pain. Despite that, we maintained a fragile connection. Occasional family gatherings, long phone calls that turned into arguments, even a tense international trip that felt more like emotional endurance training than a vacation. Still, I kept trying. Last year, I invited her to visit me in my city to see a musician she'd adored since my childhood. The plan was specific and short. She'd arrive midweek, we'd attend the show, she'd leave the next afternoon to visit my siblings, and I'd depart early the following morning for a work trip. The moment she arrived, she casually mentioned she'd only purchased a one-way ticket. My stomach dropped. I reminded her, several times, that I wouldn't be home after her scheduled departure and that I wasn't comfortable with anyone staying in my home while I was away. Each reminder was brushed off with vague reassurances. After the concert, she admitted she still hadn't booked a flight. Prices had increased, she said, and she decided to stay a few extra days instead, alone, in my house. While I was gone, I told her clearly that I was leaving before sunrise and that she needed to be on a plane. I even offered to pay the difference. She refused, accused me of treating her like a stranger, and insisted that being my mother gave her the right to stay. The argument exploded. Finally, she snapped and demanded I take her to the airport. I think she expected me to fold like I always had before. I didn't. I drove her there in silence, unloaded her bag, and told her that if she couldn't secure a flight, I'd help pay for a hotel. Then I walked away, heart pounding, knowing exactly how dramatic it looked. It's been months, and I still replay that moment, standing at the curb, choosing myself for the first time, and wondering if setting that boundary cost me whatever fragile peace we had left, or if it was the only choice I ever really had. Is it wrong to draw a line when family oversteps at a Hilton vacation? For the holidays, I booked a luxury suite at the Hilton Grand Resort in Orlando. It was a rare promotional deal. 2 connected rooms, enough space for 8 people, and my spouse and I reserved it for ourselves, our 2 kids, and a close family friend with their children. We were genuinely excited because this trip felt like a small escape we'd all been looking forward to for months. Out of nowhere, my spouse mentioned that her brother and his partner had booked a separate room at the same Hilton, using the same promotion the night before we arrived. I didn't think much of it until later that evening, when my spouse casually told me she had already told them, and another family they were traveling with, that they could come into our suite and use our bathrooms after checking out. This other family isn't close to us at all. I've only met them briefly at a couple of kids' birthday parties. And their child has a reputation for being unruly. I tried to calmly explain why this bothered me. I wasn't upset about my in-laws. I actually enjoyed them and wouldn't mind them using our space at all. What made me uncomfortable was having near strangers and their kids roaming through a suite we were sharing with our own guests, without any discussion or consent. It felt invasive, unfair to our friends, and stressful before a trip that was supposed to be relaxing. When I said I wished she had talked to me first, the conversation immediately turned cold, and she accused me of being controlling before hanging up. Now I'm left wondering if I'm really being unreasonable for wanting boundaries respected, especially when it comes to shared space and people I barely know. Or if it's fair to expect a conversation before opening our hotel room to extra guests. Is it wrong to say no to strangers using our Hilton suite? Is it wrong to keep one small tradition just for me? I share parenting duties with my partner, and we alternate mornings getting our child ready for school, including packing lunches. On the days it's my turn, I sometimes slip a small handwritten note into the lunch bag. They're nothing elaborate, just quiet little messages about a book we're reading together, a plan for the weekend, or a simple reminder that I'm proud and thinking about them. It's become a soft, private ritual that feels very mine. Something tender I do without announcement or expectation. One morning, my partner happened to walk in while I was writing one of these notes. He paused, watched for a second, and then asked if I could start signing them from both of us instead of just me. I told him, gently, that I'd rather not. I explained that this wasn't meant to be a shared statement or a family announcement. It was just a personal message. I added that if he wanted to write his own notes on his days, I thought that would be lovely. I even slid a scrap of paper across the counter to make the point that I wasn't stopping him from doing anything similar. That's when things shifted. He stiffened, said he shouldn't have to write his own note, and accused me of shutting him out. He compared it to excluding him from signing holiday cards or claiming gifts as mine alone. His voice rose, frustration spilling out as he insisted it was the same thing. To me, it didn't feel the same at all. This wasn't a public gesture or a shared milestone, just a quiet moment of connection. The argument lingered in the air long after breakfast was over. I was left wondering whether protecting this tiny, personal tradition made me selfish, or whether it's okay for each parent to have their own ways of showing love instead of merging everything into a single signature. Is telling the truth worth family fallout? I'm an 18-year-old woman living in a small coastal town in a different country from where I grew up. And the week before winter break completely unraveled me. Between final exams and university application deadlines, my sleep turned chaotic, vivid nightmares, waking up every hour, and then crashing so hard it felt like being knocked unconscious. One morning I woke up to the kind of accident I hadn't had since childhood. I'd wet the bed. It immediately dragged me back to being a kid, when my parents treated stress-related accidents like moral failures. Even normal bathroom needs were framed as inconveniences to them. So I learned early to hide everything. I stripped the sheets at dawn, ran the washing machine before anyone woke up, and pretended nothing happened. A few days later, I was venting with two close friends at a cafe near campus. We were spiraling together about application fees, deadlines, and the pressure to not mess up our futures. One friend admitted stress had gotten so bad her hair was thinning. The conversation turned into a sort of gallows humor confessional, each of us sharing something humiliating but real. I finally joked, half laughing and half mortified, that I'd been so stressed I'd had a nighttime accident. It felt safe saying it there, like releasing a secret into a room where it wouldn't be weaponized. I didn't know one of those friends would tell her mother, a pediatric physician who works at a private clinic. Her mom panicked out of concern and called my parents directly. That's when everything exploded. My parents weren't worried about my health or stress. They were furious that I'd made them look bad by not telling them first when I tried to explain that I was scared of being shamed or punished. They snapped back that I couldn't have been that scared if I was willing to talk to other people's parents. The irony was crushing. My friend's mom had responded with calm kindness and actual concern, while my own parents were livid. Now they've banned me from seeing that friend outside of school unless I apologize to her mother and tell her I made the whole thing up for attention. They want me to rewrite reality to protect their image. I refuse. I won't lie about my body or my stress to make them more comfortable. Especially after years of being taught to hide anything vulnerable. I didn't choose for this to spread, but I did choose to tell the truth. And I still believe that should be my right. So am I wrong for refusing to lie and taking the fallout instead? Was I wrong for speaking up after my friends singled out my relationship at her party? I'm 23 and have been living in the same city for a few years now. I've been with my partner, Liam, 25, for just over 2 years. We live together, share a routine, and usually attend social events as a unit. Not because we're glued to each other, but because our lives are genuinely intertwined. My friend, Hannah, 23, and I have known each other since our late teens. Back when we were classmates and bonded over complaining about school and dreaming about independence. We've had minor disagreements before, but nothing that ever hinted at what happened here. Hannah threw herself a big birthday party at a rented venue in the city. It was clearly planned to feel important. Printed seating charts, assigned tables, decorations everywhere. Around 35 people were invited. Weeks earlier, I RSVP'd for both me and Liam. When we arrived and checked the seating list, I felt my stomach drop. I was assigned to Hannah's table with her closest friends. Front and center, Liam, meanwhile, was seated on the opposite side of the room with people he didn't know at all. At first, I genuinely assumed it was a mistake. I pulled Hannah aside quietly, expecting her to apologize and fix it. Instead, she told me it was intentional. She said she didn't want couples stuck together and wanted people to socialize more. That explanation collapsed instantly when I looked around and realized every other couple, some who had been dating only a few months, was seated together. When I pointed this out, she finally admitted the truth. She thought Liam would drag the energy down and said I'd be more fun without him around. For context, Liam is quiet but kind, polite, and has never caused tension at any gathering. Once the dinner started, the awkwardness became impossible to ignore. Liam sat stiffly at his table, smiling too hard, clearly aware that he was the only person separated from their partner. He tried to joke about it when he caught my eye, but I could tell he was embarrassed and uncomfortable. It felt less like a seating choice and more like a public statement about how unwelcome he was. I confronted Hannah again, still privately, and told her that deliberately singling us out, especially while seeing everyone else with their partners, was hurtful and unnecessary. I also said her comments about Liam were unfair. She rolled her eyes, told me it was her birthday, and said I was being dramatic and selfish. I didn't cause a scene. We stayed, we ate, smiled, and clapped at the right moments. But I was quieter than usual, and the night felt heavy instead of celebratory. Since then, Hannah has been flooding my phone with messages accusing me of ruining her birthday, embarrassing her, and making everything about my relationship. Some mutual friends agree with her and say I should have kept my feelings to myself for the sake of the party. Others think what she did was intentional and cruel, and that I was right to say something. I didn't want to create drama, but I also didn't want to silently accept my partner being publicly excluded and judged. I'm still torn, and I keep replaying the night in my head, wondering if I crossed a line or if I simply refused to stay quiet when I should have. Am I cruel for letting a child's birthday be empty? This school year, a new girl, I'll call her Mara, transferred into my daughter's small private academy, with barely a dozen kids per class. There's no room to fade into the background, and Mara made an impression almost immediately. Lessons were constantly interrupted, teachers were stretched thin, and by mid-autumn there was an incident where lunches started going missing. My daughter was one of the kids affected. There were apologies, awkward meetings, and shortly after, a carefully worded school-wide message about personal space and keeping hands to yourself. When I asked what sparked it, my daughter admitted Mara had been grabbing, hugging, and clinging to classmates who were visibly uncomfortable. This isn't kindergarten, it's the last stretch before middle school. Social lines are sharper now, and my daughter has grown increasingly anxious around Mara. She's never been unkind, never mocked or excluded her outright, but she dreads being cornered or touched without warning. I've crossed paths with Mara myself a few times, and while I won't pretend to diagnose anything, it's clear she struggles socially in ways the other kids don't. That awareness sits heavy with me, because I know how isolating that can be. Then the birthday invitations went out. Bright envelopes, handed out with hope. My daughter brought hers home and quietly told me she didn't want to go. Normally, that would be the end of it. She's old enough to decide where she feels safe and comfortable. But as the week went on, I spoke to other parents, the ones whose kids are my daughter's closest friends. One by one, they admitted the same thing. Their kids weren't going either. The party is next weekend, and unless something changes, Mara may be celebrating alone. Now I'm torn in two. One part of me believes forcing my daughter to attend would teach her a terrible lesson. That her discomfort doesn't matter. That politeness should come at the expense of her boundaries. The other part of me can't shake the image of a child waiting for guests who never arrive. Candles burning down in silence. Parents scrambling to hide their heartbreak. I know I could prevent that scene by making my daughter go, even if she's the only one there. But is it kindness to sacrifice my child's sense of safety for someone else's feelings? Or am I teaching her that compassion only counts when it costs nothing? And if I do nothing at all, am I the adult who allowed a lonely child's worst fear to come true? Did I break an unwritten grocery law by standing in line too soon? I was at a crowded supermarket I'll call Fresh Meadow Market, one of those big-name chains that feels a lot like every other one. When this surprisingly dramatic situation unfolded, I was shopping with two close relatives who helped take care of me. And the store was absolute chaos. Every checkout lane backed up, carts wedged at odd angles, people sighing loudly like it was a competitive sport. Seeing how bad the lines were, They asked me to stand in one of the shorter ones while they rushed back to grab the single thing. We'd forgotten. This is something we've done before without issue. And I've always handled it the same way. If it somehow becomes my turn and they're not back yet, I step aside and let the next shopper go so I don't slow anything down or hold anyone hostage with an empty cart. While I was waiting there quietly, holding nothing and bothering no one, the man behind me suddenly lost it. He accused me, loudly, of being rude, disrespectful, and cutting the line, insisting that you're only allowed to queue up after every single item is already in your possession. He didn't explain why this was apparently a sacred rule, just spoke with the confidence of someone delivering a moral verdict. The tension felt absurdly high, like I'd violated some ancient grocery code rather than just standing still in a public space. There are no posted rules at Fresh Meadow Market about this, and I wasn't blocking the cashier or preventing the line from moving. Yet he acted like I'd personally sabotaged his entire afternoon. To make matters more intense, my relatives weren't wandering aimlessly or adding a dozen things to the cart. They had gone straight to the pet aisle to grab a massive bag of Canine Harvest Prime Blend dog food and a smaller pouch of Pup Joy variety bites, both from the same section and both impossible to carry by hand. The kibble alone was heavy enough to justify the cart, and it honestly never crossed our minds that forgetting one bulky item meant we should abandon our spot and restart the whole process from the back of the line like we'd committed some kind of retail sin. Still, after being publicly scolded by a stranger who seemed personally offended by my presence, I've been wondering ever since, did I actually do something wrong here? Or was this just misplaced holiday stress exploding in aisle 7? Is saying no at work a crime now? I'm in my early 30s and work at a modest-sized firm with a few dozen employees. The kind of place where everyone pretends to know everyone else but most interactions are shallow and transactional. Last week, a senior administrator named Marlene took it upon herself to sweep through the office announcing that we were all pitching in for a birthday surprise for a woman named Talia. Someone from a completely different division whose face I recognize only because we've passed each other near the coffee machine a handful of times. We've never collaborated, never spoken beyond polite nods, and certainly never shared anything resembling a relationship. Marlene declared the contribution would be $35 per person for a gift card and an elaborate dessert, as if this were a foregone conclusion rather than a request. And when I didn't immediately respond, she appeared at my desk later that afternoon with a tight smile and asked if I was participating. I calmly told her I was opting out, explaining that I don't usually contribute to group gifts for people I don't actually work with or know, which seemed reasonable to me. Her expression shifted instantly, surprise curdling into mild disapproval, and she brushed it off with a pointed, "It's not a lot of money," before walking away. Since then, the air around me has changed. Conversations go quiet when I approach. Smiles feel forced, and one colleague even joked loudly that I was the holdout, as if I'd committed some kind of social betrayal. Now I'm left wondering whether I unknowingly violated some sacred workplace ritual or if refusing to buy affection for a near stranger has somehow branded me as difficult or stingy. Even though I genuinely believe generosity should be voluntary and personal, not enforced through side eyes and whispered judgments. Did I cross a line by forcing my partner into the backseat to save my sanity and our safety? What should have been a routine holiday road trip has turned into a lingering argument that still hasn't cooled down weeks later. Every winter, our family piles into the car to visit my partner's parents. It's a long drive, hours on the road, cutting through dense traffic, unpredictable weather, and miles of brake lights. Because she hates driving in heavy congestion and gets anxious behind the wheel. I always drive. That part isn't up for debate. She also struggles with motion sickness, which means she insists on riding in the front seat, since she can't take standard motion sickness meds after a bad reaction years ago. Here's the problem. She is a nightmare passenger. I don't say that lightly. I'm a cautious driver with a clean record. No accidents, no tickets, no risky behavior. I slow down early, leave space, and stay alert. But the moment a car 3 lanes over taps its brakes, she gasps like we're about to collide. She grabs the door handle, slaps her palm against the dashboard, inhales sharply, and blurts out warnings non-stop. Watch out, slow down, oh my god, over and over, for hours. It's relentless. I've tried to explain, calmly, repeatedly, that her reactions actually make it harder for me to focus. When someone beside you keeps reacting like disaster is seconds away, it plants doubt where there doesn't need to be any. She always responds the same way. She's nervous. She can't help it, and if she's reacting that strongly, it must be because I'm driving badly. The drive to her parents' place was miserable. The weather was icy, traffic crawled, and the tension in the front seat felt thicker than the fog on the windshield. By the time we arrived, I was exhausted, not from the road, but from being constantly second-guessed and startled. So when it was time to head home, I made a decision. I told her I couldn't do another drive like that. I said she could either sit in the back seat, or she could drive. She immediately accused me of being cruel. reminding me of her motion sickness and saying I was humiliating her. I suggested she rest, or try to sleep through the drive. That only made things worse. She refused to drive, refused to consider any compromise, and finally climbed into the backseat beside our younger child in silence. The difference was night and day. The road home was calmer, not just traffic-wise, but emotionally. No gasps, no grabbing, no running commentary on every car within sight, just quiet and focus. She didn't say a word the entire drive. When we got home, that silence exploded. She told me she felt nauseous the whole time and chose not to say anything because she didn't want to make a big deal. She said being sent to the backseat made her feel small, dismissed, and deeply hurt, that I chose my comfort over her physical well-being. I told her I chose safety and sanity after years of asking her to stop behavior she admits she can't control. Now she's still angry, and I'm still conflicted. I didn't want to embarrass her, but I also didn't want to spend another multi-hour drive on edge, fighting distractions I've repeatedly said are dangerous. So did I protect everyone in the car or did I go too far? Did I ruin the family by not faking joy at a hijacked birthday? I'm a woman in my mid-30s, and a few weeks ago I hosted what was supposed to be a low-key joint birthday dinner at my home. In our family, birthdays are often grouped together to keep things simple, and this one was meant to celebrate me and my husband's younger cousin, who had just turned 26. The house was already tense before anyone arrived, since my husband's parents have been living with us for nearly 3 years while looking for the right place, which has quietly turned our home into a pressure cooker of unspoken expectations. Barely 5 minutes after guests walked in, my mother-in-law abruptly announced it was time to eat. I headed into the kitchen to serve food, relieved to escape the noise for a moment. While I was gone, my sister-in-law apparently decided that this was the perfect time for a major reveal. I heard muffled voices from the living room, then a sharp gasp, followed by my mother-in-law nearly screaming in disbelief. I didn't see the moment itself, but it didn't take a genius to realize a pregnancy had just been announced. By the time my mother-in-law rushed into the kitchen waving a small box like it was a holy relic, the moment had already peaked. I congratulated her calmly and went back to the living room, where I politely asked my brother-in-law a few questions about timelines and plans. The party moved on. Cake was cut. People laughed. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Almost 2 hours later, my sister-in-law suddenly burst into tears and announced she wanted to leave immediately. The room froze. As they walked out, I overheard my mother-in-law mutter something about how some people just don't show emotion. When she returned, I asked what had happened, and that's when I was told the truth. My sister-in-law felt devastated because she believed no one had been excited enough about her pregnancy. I tried to explain that I hadn't even been present when the announcement happened, that it had been framed as a gift to her parents, and that this gathering had been billed as a birthday celebration. I gently pointed out that big announcements are usually planned around events like that, not dropped into them. I was immediately shut down. I was told it wasn't selfish, that I should have reacted better, and that I'd somehow made the moment about myself. What made everything uglier was the unspoken history. This same woman has a pattern of making cruel jokes that everyone pretends not to hear. She regularly comments on my mother-in-law's weight, her lack of income, even once joked that she'd be free labor for the baby's room because she had nothing better to do. These remarks are always excused, never corrected, and yet somehow, I was expected to perform joy on command. A few days later, I found out my in-laws decided to skip the holidays with us entirely and spend them with her instead. No conversation, no resolution, just distance and silence. I don't hate her, and I don't resent the pregnancy itself, but I also don't believe excitement should be demanded, especially when it's announced in the middle of someone else's celebration and followed by emotional fallout. I keep replaying the night in my head, wondering if I truly failed some unspoken family test, or if I was simply punished for not pretending hard enough. Should I let my wife keep using my expensive chef knife on plastic? I do almost all the cooking in our home, every meal, every day. 2 years ago, my wife gifted me a $130 Takumi Edge chef's knife for Christmas. It was the first high-end knife I've ever owned, and I treat it like a fragile treasure. Hand wash only, dry immediately, never the dishwasher. My wife, however, treats it like a $5 Megamart utility knife. She leaves it on the counter, cuts lemons and tomatoes on it, and worst of all, slices through thick plastic packaging that ruins the blade. I've asked repeatedly for her to stop, but nothing changes. This morning, she grabbed it to open a sausage pack. I told her to use scissors or one of the cheap knives in the drawer. She ignored me and used the expensive knife anyway. I finally snapped. Using this knife like that is like taking one of your designer dresses and scrubbing the floor with it. She shrugged, and our adult daughter said, "You gave it to her. She can do what she wants." Now, I'm hiding the knife after every use. I cook for my family every day, and it feels like something I love is being slowly destroyed in front of me. Should I keep letting her use it this way? Can I be wrong for saying she'll never be my parent? I'm a teenage girl living between two very different worlds, and the tension in one of them has started to feel unbearable. My dad married my stepmother years ago, and at first she seemed gentle, almost overly polite, like she was trying hard to fit into our family. But over time, that softness hardened into something sharp and watchful, and now every day around her feels like walking through a room full of tripwires. The control crept in quietly. She started monitoring my food in a way that felt obsessive, insisting I measure every spoonful of yogurt or cereal because my portions were too generous. She would hover while I did it, calm voice, tight smile, always careful to stop the moment my dad walked into the room. I tried to rationalize it. She talks constantly about diets, about doctors, about needing to lose weight, so I told myself it wasn't really about me. Still, it was humiliating, especially since I'm active, healthy, and have never had issues with my weight. It didn't feel like concern. It felt like surveillance. What makes it worse is how she communicates. My mom is direct. If there's a problem, we talk, sometimes argue, but it ends with clarity. My stepmother does the opposite. She'll say something cutting in the calmest tone imaginable, then retreat into her bedroom like nothing happened. The next day, I'll wake up to a long, perfectly structured message detailing everything I did wrong and how it made her feel. No discussion, no chance to respond, just a verdict. There have been so many small moments that piled up into something heavy. She once decided my younger brother and I weren't needed when my dad went to pick up a new puppy. Even though I was counting down the days and could barely sleep from excitement. She regularly checks my school records and my dad's emails about me. Then prompts him to have a talk with me. Even though my grades are strong and there's nothing to hide, it feels like she's constantly looking for something to fix, something to correct, something to tighten her grip around. The explosion happened in a car ride that should have been ordinary. She started in again about my lunch, saying I packed too much food and needed to be more mindful. Something inside me finally broke. I told her, out loud, that I was glad she wasn't my parent and that she never would be. The words felt harsh, but also like the truth ripping its way out after being swallowed for too long. Since then, my dad says she's backing off, but it doesn't feel that way. She still monitors from the shadows, still comments when he's not around, still acts like she has authority over my body, my school, my life. I feel boxed in, judged, and constantly bracing myself in my own home. I keep asking myself if I went too far, if I should have been gentler, if this is just teenage emotion colliding with a difficult family dynamic. But how long am I supposed to stay quiet while someone insists on parenting me without ever making me feel safe or respected? And was I really wrong for finally saying it out loud? Is it cruel to shut my brother out because his wife dominates everything? I'm a woman in my late 20s, and I'm planning a game night at my place that's supposed to feel relaxed, fun, and social, the kind where people actually get to laugh, play, and finish a sentence. I desperately want my older brother there. He's someone I love and miss, even though we live in the same city. The problem is his wife. She isn't openly mean or cruel, but once she enters a room, the air shifts. She speaks loudly, constantly, and without pause, as if silence itself is something she has to defeat. Conversations don't happen around her. It gets swallowed. It doesn't matter if we're at a family dinner, a holiday gathering, or a casual hangout. If someone starts talking, she interrupts before they finish the thought, redirects it to herself, and barrels forward with another long story that somehow loops back to her life. Her feelings, her opinions, asking questions isn't really her thing, unless it's just a setup to talk more. If I want to have an actual conversation with my brother, I have to physically corner him when she's distracted, because when they're together, she speaks for both of them and he fades into the background. They've been married a little over a year, but this behavior has existed far longer. I've talked to my brother about it more than once. He admits it's exhausting, admits it's disruptive, admits he's tried to address it with her. Nothing changes. He says she struggles with anxiety and claims she's been seeing a therapist for years. And I genuinely try to be empathetic. But empathy doesn't make it easier to sit through hours of being talked over. The last time she came to a game night, it was a disaster. She talked over the rules, delayed people's turns, and practically shouted unrelated stories while others were trying to play. People stopped engaging. The energy died. What was supposed to be fun turned into everyone politely enduring her until the night finally ended. So this time, I made a choice I'm not proud of but felt cornered into. I invited cousins and close friends instead, some of whom are traveling from another city to be there. I didn't invite my brother, because realistically, he wouldn't come without his wife, and I don't have the emotional bandwidth to sacrifice another gathering to her inability to stop talking. I haven't told him yet, and I'm dreading the moment he finds out, especially since he lives nearby and others are coming from much farther away. I feel like I'm choosing between protecting the joy of the night and hurting someone I love, and I can't tell if I'm setting a necessary boundary or quietly becoming the villain in my own family. Was I wrong for not forcing myself to eat an overpriced dinner I didn't choose? during a trip to another city to visit my partner and his relatives. He decided that my final night should be celebrated with a big family dinner. He picked a trendy all-you-can-eat grill and sushi spot called Firequay Table, a place he raved about, and invited 4 of his relatives along without really asking how I felt about it. The deal was one of those fixed-price menus where you cook everything yourself, and anything left on the table costs extra. I've never been a big red meat person. I mostly eat poultry and seafood and avoid certain meats altogether. Still, I didn't complain and ordered what I knew I'd actually finish: grilled chicken, shrimp, rice, and vegetables. While we were cooking, my partner kept loading the grill with beef cuts and several plates of meat I don't normally eat. I stuck to my food and finished everything I ordered. When he offered me beef, I tried a bit to be polite. When he pushed a different meat, I hesitated, but the look he gave me made it feel like refusing wasn't an option. So I forced down a small piece. He even tried to pass more of it off as something else. And that's when I finally said I was full and stopped. From that moment on, his energy completely changed. The drive back was silent, tense, and uncomfortable. Then he snapped, telling me he'd spent nearly $300 on dinner and that all I'd eaten was a few bites of cheap food. He accused me of being ungrateful and wasting his money, even though I hadn't ordered the expensive items, hadn't asked for the restaurant, and hadn't left anything uneaten on my plate. I paid attention to what I ordered, finished every bite, and never asked for more than I could handle. He chose the place, he invited the group, and he ordered most of the food that inflated the bill. Still, somehow, I was the problem for not eating things I never wanted in the first place. Am I wrong for wanting to confront my brother about how he feeds his child? My niece, who I'll call Lena, is only 7, and watching her grow up has started to feel less like normal babysitting and more like watching a slow-motion crisis. I help out by watching her a few afternoons a week when my brother Evan and his wife Claire are working, and while Lena is sweet, funny, and incredibly affectionate, her relationship with food is deeply unsettling. She's already well over 130 pounds and barely taller than my shoulder when I sit down, and she is constantly asking to eat, sometimes minutes after finishing a full meal. Food seems to be the only comfort she's ever been taught. At home, her parents have never enforced any boundaries around eating. Vegetables are completely optional, and in practice, non-existent. Claire likes to joke that kids know their bodies, even while laughing about Lena drinking so much milk she throws up. They regularly make separate meals just for her, always processed and fried, while the adults eat something else. I've watched her eat an entire family-sized box of syrup-drenched sausage pancakes in one day, followed by dessert, because she cried for it. No one said no. No one ever does. What makes this worse is that Lena has already started talking about being teased at school. She's not even in 2nd grade yet, and she knows she's different. I've tried, gently, to offer healthier options when she's with me, but she refuses everything that isn't breaded, sweet, or soaked in sauce, and I have no authority to push it further because her parents immediately undo any limits I set. Once, during a family gathering, she ate an entire loaf of garlic bread meant for 10 people while my back was turned. When I checked later, that bread alone had more calories than most adults need in a full day. I'm exhausted, worried, and honestly starting to feel resentful, which makes me feel awful because none of this is her fault. Both of her parents are thin, dismissive, and defensive, and I know bringing this up could explode into a huge fight. But standing by while they laugh it off feels just as wrong. I don't want to shame them or her. I want to protect a little girl who's being set up for a lifetime of health issues and cruelty from other kids. If I finally tell my brother and his wife that their approach to feeding their child is harming her, would that make me the bad guy? Can I really sit front row at a wedding built on betrayal? For most of my life, my father, now in his early 60s, was married to my mother, whom he treated like an afterthought for nearly 3 decades. Their marriage unraveled slowly and painfully, marked by repeated affairs, quiet humiliations, and a kind of disrespect that became normal behind closed doors. When they finally divorced, it felt less like a tragedy and more like an overdue ending to something that had been broken for years. I made my peace with that and even accepted the idea that one day he might remarry. What I can't accept is who he's marrying. The woman he's engaged to is the last person he cheated on my mother with. The final betrayal before everything collapsed. As if that weren't surreal enough, she also happens to share my mother's first name, which makes the whole situation feel like some cruel joke I don't understand. I've never met her, I've never wanted to, and I genuinely don't know how I'd even refer to her without feeling sick to my stomach. My siblings, after their own tense conversations with him, have already made it clear they won't be attending the ceremony. I tried to stay quiet and avoid the confrontation, hoping distance would speak for me, but recently my father cornered me and asked if I'd not only attend the wedding, but take part in it. The request felt unreal, like he expected me to celebrate a relationship that exists because my family was torn apart. The idea of standing there, smiling for photos, And pretending this union isn't built on years of damage feels wrong on a level one can't explain. Now I'm stuck wondering whether refusing makes me disloyal, or if going would mean betraying myself. Do I owe half my life's success to the brother who never left? I grew up as the overlooked middle child in a struggling rural family where favoritism was obvious, and opportunity was scarce. When a chance came for one son to work abroad, my mother pushed me out the door, not because she believed in me, but because she wanted my older brother close to her. I left behind my newly married wife, missed the birth of my child, and spent years grinding through exhausting work in a foreign country, sending nearly everything I earned back home just to keep the family afloat. While I was gone, I lived in constant guilt and loneliness, telling myself the sacrifice would mean something one day. After years of this, I took a risk no one supported. I sold part of the land that legally belonged to me and poured everything into starting a business. My family mocked the idea and warned I was throwing my life away. Instead, the business succeeded beyond anything I imagined. I finally moved my wife and child to the city, bought a home, and gave them stability I never had. That's when my family turned on me. My mother and siblings claimed my success wasn't really mine. That because my brother stayed behind. He deserved half of everything I built. They said I only succeeded because he held things together, ignoring the fact that I funded the household for years, missed irreplaceable moments with my child, and even allowed him to profit from my land while I was gone. Now my extended family and community call me selfish for refusing to hand over half my future. After a lifetime of being pushed aside, this is the first thing that has ever truly been mine, and I'm being told I don't deserve to keep it. Did I cross a line by defending my groceries from a guilty roommate? I share an apartment with 2 roommates, and one night one of them staggered in late, dramatic and annoyed, announcing they had forgotten their wallet at work. They immediately asked if they could eat my food, just this once, as if it were a tiny favor and not the meals I had carefully planned for the entire week. I shop intentionally, buying specific items from places like Freshway Market and Mealcraft Foods. And I rely on that food to get me through busy days. When I said no, the air in the room shifted instantly, like I'd committed some kind of personal betrayal instead of setting a boundary. They snapped back that I was petty and accused me of being a bad friend. Then sulked loudly while scrolling on their phone. I even pointed out that there was bread and basic sandwich stuff available. Perfectly fine for one night. But that apparently wasn't good enough. Instead, they ordered overpriced takeout from a place called Red Bull Kitchen and made sure I knew how offended they were the entire time it arrived. The tension lingered long after the food was gone, thick and uncomfortable. The next day, things escalated. I found out they'd complained to our other roommate, framing the story as if I'd heartlessly refused to help someone in need. Since then, I've been met with side eyes, awkward silence, and an unspoken verdict hanging over the apartment. What makes this sting more is that every time I go grocery shopping, I always ask if anyone wants me to pick something up for them, as long as they pay me back, and they always say no. Suddenly, though, my fridge became fair game the moment it was convenient for them. I don't mind helping in a real emergency, but forgetting your wallet and rejecting perfectly reasonable food options doesn't feel like one. Still, with the way everyone's reacting, I'm left wondering if standing my ground made me the villain in my own home. Did telling the truth cost someone their reputation at work? I'm a man in my early 20s working overnight security at a warehouse run by a logistics company I'll call Stillway Freight. From the beginning, I became known for always carrying a backpack stuffed with useful things. Pain relievers, gum, breath spray, bandages, allergy meds, you name it. Coworkers joked that I was basically a walking corner store, and during long, quiet night shifts, it gave people a reason to talk to me instead of just staring at loading docks for hours. Eventually, I added a few personal care items that people on night shift often got stuck needing when nothing was open: pads, tampons, a small deodorant stick from a brand like Fresh Mist, and some hand lotion similar to Skinnies. Most of the women I worked with were grateful or pleasantly surprised. It became one of those unspoken things. If someone was in a bind at 2 a.m., they knew where to go, and no one made a big deal out of it. That changed after one interaction at the gate. I was checking paperwork with another guard when a coworker, I'll call her Mara, drove up looking flustered and said she needed to leave early to buy supplies. Without thinking much about it, I told my coworker where in my bag the supplies were and offered her options. She took them, barely thanked me, and drove off. The moment felt off, but I didn't think much of it and went back to work. The following week, I was pulled into HR and told a complaint had been filed saying I made a female coworker feel uncomfortable and unsafe. Hearing that made my stomach drop. HR reviewed the camera footage, listened to my explanation, and ultimately said I hadn't done anything wrong, but advised me to keep my distance from Mara. Even so, word spread fast by the next few shifts. People were whispering, side-eyeing me, and I could tell a story was circulating that I was weird or creepy. That word has followed me most of my life because of how I look, and it hit harder than I expected. So I made a decision. If carrying those items could be twisted into something inappropriate, I was done. I removed all the personal care products from my bag and left them with HR. When coworkers noticed and asked why I stopped, I didn't sugarcoat it. I told them exactly what happened and said they were free to confirm it with management if they wanted. The atmosphere shifted almost immediately. People were angry, not at me, but at Mara. She became distant, avoided, and openly upset, eventually confronting me and saying I had turned everyone against her and made work unbearable. She said I should have kept quiet and let it blow over. I told her I wasn't willing to silently carry a label that could follow me for years just to protect someone else's comfort. Now the workplace feels tense, and I'm left wondering whether being honest was necessary self-defense, or whether telling the full story caused damage that can't be undone. Would I be wrong for moving away after almost losing my child? After a terrifying birth that nearly killed both me and my newborn daughter, my life was split into a clear before and after. I'm a 27-year-old woman, married to my 29-year-old husband, and we welcomed our first child after a labor so traumatic that doctors later told us how close it came to tragedy. She was born silent and motionless, and for several agonizing moments, no one knew if she would survive. That experience changed everything about how I see family, safety, and support. My husband and I grew up in completely different regions of the country. After university, he relocated across the map to live near my relatives. We currently rent a small place about 20 minutes from my side of the family. But despite the distance, they've been largely absent. My mother, who lives nearby, has stopped by only a handful of times since the birth. Each visit is brief, just long enough to snap photos for social media, before she disappears again. My father, on the other hand, is very present, but our history is complicated. Growing up, he was controlling, emotionally harsh, and manipulative, and while he dotes on my daughter now, those old wounds never fully healed. By contrast, my husband's relatives live roughly 12 hours away and somehow manage to show up more for us than anyone close by. When we visit them, the difference is overwhelming. Meals appear without being asked for. Laundry is quietly done. We're encouraged to sleep, shower, step outside, and breathe. Babysitters are offered so we can feel like a couple again instead of two exhausted people barely holding it together. When we spend time with my family, the experience is the opposite. Hands immediately grab for the baby. No one asks how we're doing, and help is non-existent. Financially, where we live now feels like a dead end. The cost of living is crushing, and homeownership feels like a fantasy rather than a goal. The area near my husband's family is more affordable, has better schools, and offers the kind of long-term stability we desperately want for our daughter. So we quietly started applying for jobs there, hoping for a fresh start surrounded by people who actually show up for us. That's when everything exploded. Somehow my father found out about our plans and accused us of stealing his granddaughter. He said if we moved, he would step back from our lives entirely. What hurt the most wasn't just the threat. It was the realization that he seemed more devastated about losing access to my child than about losing his own daughter. My mother echoed similar guilt-laden comments, questioning why we'd even consider leaving when they're right here, despite rarely making the effort to be involved. I don't want to hurt anyone or cut ties out of spite. I know my father genuinely loves his granddaughter, and part of me feels guilty for even considering a move. But I also know what it's like to nearly die, to watch my child almost slip away, and to realize how fragile everything is. I want a life where my family is supported, stable, and surrounded by people who don't just want photos, but actually want to help us survive. So am I really wrong for wanting to relocate to a place where we can finally feel safe, supported, and hopeful about the future?